My palms are sweating as I stare at the computer screen, the numbers swimming before my eyes. Another raise. A decent one, too. Enough to finally start putting a real dent in my savings. Maybe even think about a down payment on a place that doesn't smell faintly of mildew and regret. 25 years old and I've been grinding since graduation. A goddamn robot plugging away in it. But I've been responsible. Every penny budgeted, every future expense planned for. It's my escape from the chaos I grew up in, but the knot in my stomach twists tighter with each passing second. This raise isn't just mine. It's an invitation for a feeding frenzy. Growing up, money was a monster under the bed. My parents, God bless them, were masters of the not this month conversation. Christmas was always creative. If I wanted something, I had to bust my ass for it. Babysitting, mowing lawns, tutoring, anything to escape the constant anxiety of not having enough. My sister, Lily, though, she lived in a different reality. 22, in college, and never lifted a finger for anything. She's focused on school, was the constant refrain. She shouldn't have to worry about money. I swear, the words were practically tattooed on my brain. Then, I landed my first real job. I walked in thinking I was about to get some, "We're so proud of you," son lecture, but instead got the hard truth. Mom's voice was softer than usual, Dad's eyes, pleading. Since I was now blessed with a steady income, I needed to help out with Lily. 10% of my paycheck, straight to her, for textbooks and groceries. I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, okay. She's my sister, and college is a black hole of expenses. It was manageable, I figured. I could swing it. For a while, I transferred the money without a second thought. Then came the cracks. Lily started showing up at family dinners draped in designer clothes that screamed trust fund baby, not struggling student. Instagram became a highlight reel of fancy meals and weekend getaways. All while she complained about the crippling stress of being a full-time student. I tried to casually ask her about her classes, gauge how the money was helping, but she just bat me away with vague smiles and empty platitudes. It was like talking to a politician. One afternoon, I decided to test her. Hey, Lil, want me to just buy your textbooks directly this semester? Save you the hassle. Her laugh was brittle. Oh, already got 'em? Thanks, though. Bullshit. I knew she hadn't. That's when the truth slammed into me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't using the money for school. Not even close. I went to my parents, ready to explode. I expected anger, disappointment, anything but what I got. Mom just sighed, that infuriatingly placid look on her face. She's young, Alex. Let her enjoy life. Dad just shrugged. You can afford it? What's the big deal? The big deal? I'm killing myself, sacrificing everything to be responsible while she's blowing my money on a life I can only dream of. But, like always, my frustration was disregarded. She is in college, and you have a job, Alex. They will never understand. I let it fester, the resentment growing like a toxic vine. Then came the raise. I knew the second Mom and Dad found out, it was going to be a problem. They cornered me after dinner, their faces etched with expectation. So, about Lily, the first braced myself. Now that you're making more, Mom started, all sweetness and light, you should start giving your sister more. I actually laughed. I thought they were joking. The looks on their faces told me everything. They weren't joking. They expected me to double the amount. The word no exploded out of my mouth before I could even think. No, absolutely not. I give enough already. If Lily needs more money, she can get a part-time job like everyone else. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Mom's face contorted, her eyes narrowing, and the guilt trip began. Family takes care of each other, Alex. You're being selfish, Dad chimed in, his voice heavy with disappointment. You're lucky to have a good job. Don't forget where you came from. Lily, of course, acted like I just condemned her to a life of indentured servitude. You're so stingy. You don't want to see me succeed. She even had the gall to suggest I cover her rent and car payment. Apparently, those were now my responsibilities. Then came the comparisons. Always the comparisons. My parents brought up my cousin, Mark. Married, dual income, buys his parents a house. Mark was their golden child. They weren't even asking for that much. I tried to reason with them, explaining that my situation was different, that Mark wanted to help his parents while I was being pressured. It just made them angrier. Then they dropped the bomb, the one I knew was coming but still managed to shatter me. If you won't support your sister, we'll have to rethink our relationship with you. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. It wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum. I felt trapped, suffocated. If I kept giving, they'd keep demanding more. If I refused, I'd be the villain. I called my friend Sarah. She gets it. Emotionally stable, clear-headed, not related to me. I laid it all out, the years of financial pressure, Lily's entitlement, my parents' relentless guilt trips. Her response was immediate. Dude, they're taking advantage of you. Hearing it from someone outside the family, someone objective. It hit me harder than anything. I wasn't being a good son, a good brother. I was being used, and I was letting it happen. I started seriously considering cutting off all financial support. But the thought of the fallout, the hurricane of emotions, the endless accusations, it paralyzed me. The next day, I went back to my parents. I decided to be firm, concise. I'm not increasing the amount I give Lily. That was it. No explanation, no justification, just a flat, unwavering no. I expected pushback, arguments, maybe even some tears. I was not prepared for the full-scale nuclear meltdown that followed. Mom's face crumpled like wet paper. She didn't yell, didn't argue. She just sat down, covered her face, and started sobbing. Loud, dramatic, over-the-top sobbing designed to inflict maximum guilt. I swear, I could practically feel the weight of each tear. Dad sat across from me, shaking his head, his eyes filled with a disappointment that cut deeper than any anger. We raised you better than this, Alex. I never thought you'd turn your back on your own family. Lily wasn't even pretending to be upset. She was furious, pacing around the room, ranting about how hard things were going to be now, how she was going to suffer because I was being selfish. She went on and on about how she couldn't work while being in school, how other people in her class had support from their families, how she had been counting on me. Like her life was somehow ruined because I wasn't doubling the free money she'd been getting. I let them all talk, waiting for a break in the storm. But there wasn't one. Mom was still sobbing, Dad was still shaking his head, and Lily was still listing off every single thing she'd have to give up. Then came the real guilt trip. The look at everything we've done for you routine. Mom talked about the struggles when I was little, how they always made sure I had everything I needed, even when it was hard. Dad reminded me of the extra shifts he worked, the times they put my needs ahead of theirs. They framed it like they had sacrificed everything for me. And now it was my turn to repay them by taking care of Lily. I was exhausted. I was tired of feeling like a walking ATM. Then they hit me with the comparisons. Apparently, Mark, the perfect cousin, pays part of their mortgage. Therefore, the first should be doing the same for them and Lily. I could feel my temper simmering, threatening to boil over. I knew I needed to get out of there before I said something I regretted. I'm done, I stated. I stood up and told them my answer wasn't changing. That's when things escalated. By the time I got home, the entire extended family knew. The family group chat was a war zone. Some relatives were on my side, telling me I wasn't responsible for Lily. Others went straight into the family duty argument, saying it's normal to help out, and I was being cold-hearted. Then came the texts from my parents. Guilt trips, accusations, threats. I didn't respond. That's when Lily started posting online. Vague, passive-aggressive posts about fake family and how some people only care about money. She didn't name names, but it was obvious she was talking about me. People started commenting, agreeing with her, talking about how sad it was when family turned on you. I didn't say anything. I just blocked her. I muted the family chat too. If they wanted to argue, they could do it without me. For the first time in years, I wasn't giving them money. No more transfers. No more helping out. Nothing. Then I did something I should have done a long time ago. I went back and calculated exactly how much I had given Lily over the years. I had never added it all up before. The number made me physically ill. Tens of thousands. I had given her tens of thousands of dollars. Money that could have gone into my savings, into my future. Instead, it had gone to vacations, designer clothes, and overpriced brunches. That was the moment I knew I had to go all the way. Not just refusing the increase, but cutting her off completely. But before I could do that, my parents sent me one last message. If you won't step up, we'll find another way. Whatever that meant, I had a feeling this wasn't over. After that conversation with my parents, things went quiet. Too quiet. No calls, no messages. Nothing from Lily either. Just silence. For a second, I thought maybe they had finally accepted my decision. Maybe they had realized I wasn't going to budge. Maybe they were actually going to leave me alone. But I knew better. I checked my bank account. I always monitored my transactions, but I hadn't been checking the small details regularly. When I went through past statements more carefully, I noticed small withdrawals I had overlooked before. Nothing huge. 20 here, 35 there, spaced out over a couple of weeks. It wasn't enough to raise immediate suspicion, but something felt off. I checked further. The withdrawals weren't from anything I recognized. I wasn't spending that money, and the more I looked, the worse it got. The amounts started getting bigger, 50, 100, even a couple of $200 transfers. That's when it hit me. I knew exactly what had happened. I went straight to my bank's transaction history and checked the details. The transfers were going directly to my parents' bank account. I had once helped set up their automatic bill payments, and I must have forgotten to remove my account from those transactions, something they had clearly taken advantage of. I never thought to change it because I never imagined they'd actually steal from me. I called them immediately. No answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. I kept calling until my dad finally picked up. I didn't even have to explain why I was calling. He already knew. He didn't deny it. He didn't even act surprised. At first, they claimed it was for Lily's expenses, but when I confronted them, the truth slipped out. They had been using the money for their own bills, assuming I wouldn't mind because I had enough. They were planning to pay me back, eventually. I told him that if they needed help, they could have asked. Instead, they went behind my back and took my money without permission. Then Lily got on the phone. She wasn't apologetic. She wasn't even embarrassed. She was smug. She told me that since I refused to help, they had no other choice. If I wasn't going to willingly support my family, then they had to do what was necessary. I hung up. I went straight to my bank, locked my account, and changed every password. I added two-factor authentication, called the bank, and froze my card. I wasn't going to let them take another cent. When I told Sarah what happened, she didn't hesitate. "That's theft, Alex. You should report them." I already knew that. But reporting my own parents? That was something else entirely. Before I even had time to process it all, my parents called again. This time, they weren't pretending to be innocent. They were furious. How could I lock them out of my account? Why was I acting like they were criminals? Money shouldn't come before family. They had no shame, no regret, no acknowledgement that what they did was wrong. I checked the total amount they had taken. It was over $1,500. That's when I realized this wasn't just desperation. This was entitlement. They actually believed they had the right to my money. Then the family backlash started. Somehow word got out that I was threatening to have my own mother arrested over a little money. My phone started blowing up with messages from relatives. Some of them tried to be neutral, telling me I needed to talk things out with my parents. Others went full attack mode, calling me selfish, ungrateful, and accusing me of abandoning my family. The worst part? My parents didn't even try to deny what they did. Instead, they spun it. They told everyone they had no choice but to take the money because I was being cruel and hoarding my income instead of helping the family. They made it seem like they were struggling just to survive, that I had forced them into this. It wasn't true. They weren't drowning in debt. They weren't about to lose their home. Dad still had his job. Mom still had hers. Lily still had her apartment, still had her designer bags, still had the same lifestyle. They just wanted more. One relative actually sided with me. My uncle, the same one who had warned me before. He sent me a message saying he had been in my shoes, that my parents had used him the same way years ago. He told me to cut them off now, before they ruined my future like they almost ruined his. I thought about it. I had already locked them out of my bank account. I had stopped giving them money. But the truth was, if I let this slide, they would try again. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but eventually they'd find another way. Then my parents sent me one final text. If you really don't want to be part of this family, then fine. I stared at the screen, knowing this was another manipulation tactic. I wasn't sure if I even cared. After my parents sent that last text, if you really don't want to be part of this family, then fine, I didn't respond. For the first time, I let the silence sit. A day passed, then another, then a full week. No calls, no messages, no guilt trips. But it didn't last. My uncle, the one who always saw through their bullshit, called. He didn't waste time with small talk. This won't stop unless you stop it. You have to decide what kind of life you want. He was right. I had been making excuses, hoping they'd change, thinking maybe they'd realize what they did was wrong. But they weren't sorry. They weren't even pretending to be. I was still processing that conversation when Lily texted, not to apologize, not to check in, just a demand for money. She first acted indifferent when I asked about the money, brushing it off with vague answers. But when I finally refused to send more, she suddenly started calling it her allowance, as if she had been entitled to it all along. When I didn't respond, she kept going, said I was being selfish, that I owed her for being successful while she was still in school. She wasn't even pretending to be polite anymore. Then came my parents. They didn't ask about the stolen money. They didn't even acknowledge the bank account situation. They dismissed my anger as overreacting, like their betrayal was just a minor inconvenience instead of outright fraud. I was being petty for getting upset over something that wasn't that serious. Then the emotional hook. My mom sent an old childhood picture of us together, just the two of us, back when I was a kid. No words, just the picture. I didn't respond. A few hours later, my cousin Mark, the one I actually trust, messaged me. He told me what my parents had been saying behind my back. They were telling everyone I was a selfish, greedy brat, that I was hoarding money while my family suffered, that I had abandoned them after everything they'd done for me. I checked my bank statements again. I thought they had taken around $1,500, but I was wrong. Going back further, looking at small withdrawals I hadn't noticed before, the real number was closer to $3. Oh, that was it. That was the moment the anger kicked in. If anyone else had stolen that much money from me, I would have reported them without hesitation. So why was I letting family get away with it? I didn't plan it. I just got in my car, drove straight to their house, and knocked on the door. They looked surprised to see me. Not guilty, not ashamed, just surprised. I walked in, pulled out the printed bank statements, and put them on the table. I told them I wanted the money back. Every cent. My dad laughed. Actually laughed. He smirked, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Oh, stop acting like we robbed a bank. It's just family money." Like it was no big deal, like it was something I should just accept. Lily was there too. She rolled her eyes, made some comment about how I was just bitter because I didn't have a real life, like her. No apology, no remorse. That was the moment I knew this wasn't going to stop. They weren't going to change. They saw me as a walking paycheck. I stood up and said the words I should have said a long time ago. This is the last time I'm speaking to you until you pay me back. Silence. Then my mom lost it. She screamed that I was tearing the family apart over something so small, that I was choosing money over blood, that I was turning my back on the people who raised me. I didn't stay to argue. I didn't stay to explain. I walked out the door without looking back. As I closed it behind me, I could still hear my mom crying. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding. Had I just made the biggest mistake of my life? Or the best decision ever? For the first time in years, my phone was completely silent. No calls, no guilt-tripping messages, no Lily demanding her allowance. At first, it felt strange. My parents had always been in my ear about something, money, family obligations, reminders that I was lucky to have a good job. But now, nothing. Then Lily started posting online. It was the same passive-aggressive nonsense as before, but this time she doubled down. She posted about fake family and how greed ruins relationships. Her friends in the comments backed her up, saying how sad it was when money changed people. She never mentioned me by name, but everyone knew. It didn't stop there. The family group chat exploded. A few aunts messaged me, saying I was being cruel for refusing to help Lily when I had so much. They said family was supposed to support each other, not abandon each other over a few dollars. Some cousins, on the other hand, were on my side. One of them told me I did the right thing, saying, "You know she wasn't struggling. She just didn't want to get a job." Then I heard the real reason why my parents were so desperate for my money. Through a family friend, I found out my dad's job wasn't doing well. There were layoffs coming, and he was already struggling with bills. That explained everything. They weren't just using my money for Lily's expenses. They were relying on it to keep themselves afloat. A few days later, the silence ended. My mom called from an unknown number. It started with begging. "Just talk, Alex. Fix this before it's too late." Then came the fake apology. She didn't say they were wrong. She didn't admit to taking my money. She just said, "We're sorry you feel this way, but you have to understand where we're coming from." Then my dad jumped in. He admitted they took the money, but only because they were desperate. He said they knew I wouldn't have noticed. It wasn't that much, and they were planning to pay me back, eventually. I told them they could have asked. They could have told me the truth instead of stealing from me. They ignored that part. Meanwhile, Lily was still running her mouth online. Instead of staying quiet, she mocked me in another post. She talked about how she was glad she had real family who supported her, unlike some people who let money control them. She had no idea that my parents had admitted to stealing. Then I got another notification. Someone had tried to access my old bank account. Luckily, the account had already been locked, but the attempt came from a location I recognized, my parents' house. They were still trying to take my money. That was it. I changed everything. New passwords, two-factor authentication on everything, fraud alerts. I called my bank again and made sure they had no way of accessing anything connected to me. Then I sent a final message. If they ever tried to take money from me again, I'd go to the police. They didn't respond. For the first time in years, everything was quiet. No messages, no missed calls, no guilt trips. Just silence. Blocking my parents, my sister, and most of the family chat had wiped out all the usual drama. At first, it felt strange, like something was missing. But after a few days, that feeling faded, replaced by something else. Peace. Of course, it didn't last a week. Then the messages started coming in, not from my parents, not from my sister, but from distant relatives I barely spoke to. Some were confused. Others were outright angry. How could you abandon your family? Your parents are struggling and you turned your back on them? This isn't how family is supposed to work. I knew exactly where this was coming from. My parents had started a smear campaign. They told everyone that I had cut them off without reason, that I was hoarding money while they suffered, that I had become cold and heartless. I ignored the messages. Then my sister went off online. She didn't hold back this time. Long, dramatic posts about how greed ruins relationships, how some people only care about money, how family means nothing to them. She had her friends hyping her up in the comments, saying things like, "You deserve better," and "some people forget who was there for them." Like I hadn't just spent years funding her lifestyle. Again, I ignored it. Then my mom sent one last message from a new number. "If you have any heart left, come home and talk to us." Still no mention of the money, no apology, no owning up to what they did. Just another carefully worded attempt to pull me back in. I didn't respond. But Sarah, ever the voice of reason, told me to check my credit report again. I had locked everything down after they tried to access my old account, but I still had a bad feeling, and I was right. There it was, another attempt to open a credit card in my name. This time, they had applied at a different bank. Thankfully, it was denied, but that didn't change the fact that they were still trying to steal from me. This wasn't just about emotional manipulation anymore. This was identity theft. That was the moment I realized I had to stop giving them chances. I met with my lawyer again, showed him everything, the bank statements, the credit report, the texts, even the social media posts. I asked what my options were. He didn't even hesitate. "This is fraud, Alex. If you report this, they will take it seriously." I wasn't ready to press full charges, but I filed the fraud report. A few days later, my parents got a formal warning from the authorities. That's when the panic set in. My mom called from another new number, sobbing, saying I was trying to have my own father arrested. She begged me to take it back, said they had only done it because they were desperate. I didn't answer. Then the family group chat exploded again. Half the family was still blaming me, saying I should have handled this privately, saying I was taking things too far over money. But over time, more relatives started questioning things. Some still took my parents' side, but others, especially those who had lent them money before, began seeing the pattern. The ones who had believed my parents' lies were now questioning things. They started asking for proof. They started realizing my parents weren't the victims. Then I got a message from someone unexpected, an aunt I barely talked to. She told me she knew exactly what I was going through. My parents had borrowed money from her too, thousands, years ago, and they had never paid her back. This wasn't new behavior. They had been doing this for a long time. Then came the final betrayal. One of my cousins told me the truth. Lily knew about the credit card fraud. Not only did she know, she encouraged it. She actually told my parents to try again, because she was sure I wouldn't notice. That was it. The final wake-up call. This wasn't just toxic parents. This wasn't just a spoiled sister. This was a family built on financial manipulation. I wasn't just dealing with a one-time mistake. This was a pattern, a cycle, and it was never going to stop unless I stopped it. The next day, I made my decision. I called my lawyer and told him to move forward with a restraining order. No more warnings. No more chances. This time, I was protecting myself. Filing the restraining order felt surreal. The paperwork was straightforward. My lawyer made sure of that, but the weight of it hit differently. This wasn't just blocking their numbers or ignoring messages. This was legal proof that I was done. The order barred my parents from accessing any of my personal or financial information. No more attempts to open credit cards in my name. No more sneaky withdrawals. No more excuses. I expected backlash. I wasn't disappointed. My sister lost it. The messages were long, paragraphs upon paragraphs of insults. She called me a pathetic excuse for a brother, told me I was ruining her life, and even accused me of enjoying their suffering. I didn't respond. Then I found out my parents had moved on to their next target. A cousin messaged me out of nowhere. They had started guilt-tripping him for money, using the same lines they used on me. Family helps each other. Don't you want to support your own blood? Only this time the family was catching on. More and more relatives had pieced things together. People who had believed their sob stories now saw the pattern. It wasn't just me they had been doing this to for years. Some stopped returning their calls. Some outright cut contact. They were running out of people to manipulate. Then came the biggest shift. My sister's life started to unravel. Without my money propping up her lifestyle, reality hit her hard. She dropped out of college. She had no financial backup, no one else to cover her rent, her shopping, her vacations. She ended up working full-time in retail, something she had once called pathetic. The same job she looked down on was now her only option, and she hated it. The dramatic posts continued. Imagine having to work when your family should be supporting you. Some people really have no shame. Again, she didn't say my name, but everyone knew. Then my mom sent one last email. One day, you'll regret treating us like this. I deleted it without reading further. For the first time in years, I wasn't responsible for anyone but myself. It felt strange. I had spent so long budgeting with them in mind, worrying about their demands, waiting for the next financial crisis they would throw on me. Now nothing. Then something happened that I never saw coming. My job offered me a promotion. Not just a raise, a full relocation across the country. I thought about it for maybe 5 minutes before accepting. This was my chance. No more accidental run-ins. No more wondering if they'd show up at my door. No more family drama. A clean slate. But before I could leave, one last thing came up, a family reunion. I debated skipping it. I had no interest in seeing my parents. But my uncle, the one who had supported me from the start, convinced me to go. You should show up. Let them see you don't need them. Let them see you're okay. So I went. The second I walked in, I knew they weren't expecting me. My parents froze. My sister's face twisted like she had just swallowed something sour. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. But then something strange happened. They acted like nothing ever happened. My mom smiled, came toward me with open arms like she was about to hug me. My dad gave a small nod as if we were just casually catching up, like they hadn't spent the last few months smearing my name, like they hadn't stolen from me, like they hadn't tried to commit identity fraud. And then my mom spoke, like nothing had happened. We need to put this behind us and act like a family again, Mom said. Her voice light as if we hadn't spent months locked in a battle over their betrayal. The entire room got quiet. That's when I had had enough. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cause a scene. I just looked at her and said, "You mean, like how you tried to steal from me?" "No, thanks." Silence. The color drained from my mom's face. My dad's jaw tightened. My sister looked down at her phone like she wished she could disappear. Every single person in that room had just heard the truth. People started whispering. The same relatives who had blamed me were now looking at my parents like they were seeing them for the first time. They had spent months playing the victims. Now they were exposed. I didn't stay long after that. I had made my point. As I walked out, I knew this was the last time they would ever manipulate me again. A year, 12 full months of silence. No calls, no guilt trips, no financial demands. Moving across the country was the best decision I ever made. For the first time, I was actually living for myself. No more budgeting with my family in mind. No more anxiety every time my phone buzzed. Just peace. But while I was thriving, my sister wasn't. Without my money propping up her lifestyle, reality hit her hard. She dropped out of college. She had no financial backup, no one else to cover her rent, her shopping, her vacations. She ended up working full-time in retail, something she had once called pathetic. The same job she looked down on was now her only option, and she hated it. Meanwhile, my parents were still playing the victims. They told anyone who would listen that I had abandoned them, that I had ruined the family. But this time, fewer people believed them. After what happened at the reunion, most of the extended family had stopped helping them financially. They saw the pattern. They saw what my parents had done not just to me, but to others. The money stream dried up, and it showed. I heard from a cousin that they were struggling, bills piling up, barely scraping by. The same financial mess they had always been in. The difference? They had no one left to use. Meanwhile, my life had never been better. I bought a new car, started investing seriously. For the first time in my adult life, I was saving for myself. Even in relationships, things changed. I started dating again, and this time there were no secrets. I didn't have to worry about explaining why a chunk of my paycheck disappeared every month. I didn't have to feel guilty for spending my money on myself. Then one day, an email popped up in my inbox. It was from my mom. "I miss you. Family should come first." No apology, no mention of what they did, just a carefully worded attempt to pull me back in. I sat there, staring at the screen. Had she really changed, or were they just out of money again? I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Then I found out about my sister's new scheme. Since she couldn't manipulate me anymore, she moved on to our grandparents. A cousin told me she had been begging them for money, using the same lines she used on me. "I'm in a tough spot. Family is supposed to help. It's just a little bit. I'll pay you back." She wasn't struggling enough to change. She was just looking for a new paycheck. But my grandparents? They weren't buying it. After everything that had happened, they had finally seen her for who she was, and they cut her off too. As for my parents, things kept getting worse. With no financial lifelines left, the life they had built on other people's money was collapsing. No savings, no backup plan, no more excuses. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I realized that cutting them off wasn't cruel. It was necessary. If I had kept giving in, if I had kept playing along, I would have spent my entire life funding their irresponsibility. I thought about how different my life would have been if I had never stood up for myself. If I had kept caving, kept giving, kept letting them drain me dry. I closed my laptop, took a deep breath. For the first time ever, I felt zero guilt. No regrets, no second guessing, just peace. And for once, it was mine to keep. The coast was clear. That was the thought that kept repeating in my head. I had escaped. I was free. I had built a life on my own terms. I was good. The occasional pang of guilt or fleeting thought of what if faded quickly, replaced by the stark reality of what could have been, and what would have been had I not broken free. Then the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. My first instinct was to ignore it, let it go to voicemail. But a tiny seed of unease had been planted. What if it was an emergency? What if something had happened to my grandparents? What if? I answered it. "Hello?" My voice was tentative, wary. Silence. Then a choked sob. I knew instantly. It was my mom. "Alex." Her voice was raspy, broken. I don't know what to do. My hand tightened around the phone. Part of me wanted to hang up, sever the connection, retreat back into the safe bubble I had created. But another part, the part that still felt a flicker of familial obligation, the part that remembered her rocking me to sleep as a child, the part that yearned for the mother I once knew, that part held me back. "What's wrong?" I asked, the words clipped and cautious. Another sob? It's Dad." My stomach clenched. "What happened?" He's sick, Alex. Really sick." I waited, holding my breath, for the other shoe to drop. The guilt trip. The plea for money? The manipulation. But it didn't come. He needs treatment. But we can't afford it." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know what we're going to do." This wasn't the usual sob story. This was raw, unadulterated despair, and it scared me more than any of their previous schemes. "What kind of treatment?" I asked, forcing myself to remain calm. She explained, the words tumbling out in a rush. Tests, specialists, potential surgery, a mountain of medical bills that were already starting to bury them. The old familiar feeling of responsibility began to creep back in, the guilt gnawing at me, whispering insidious thoughts. "They're your parents. You can't just let them suffer." I don't know, Mom, I said, my voice trembling. I need to think about this. Think about what, Alex? Her voice rose, desperation creeping in. This is Dad. His life is on the line. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the sound of her anguish. I need time, Mom. I'll call you back. I hung up, the phone falling from my hand. I stood there frozen, the silence amplifying the chaos in my head. I paced around my apartment, the anxiety building, the walls closing in. I thought about all the years of manipulation, the stolen money, the lies, the broken trust. And then I thought about my dad, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, the man who helped me with my homework, the man who, despite his flaws, I still loved. Could I really turn my back on him now, when he needed me most? I called Sarah. I needed her clear-headed perspective, her unwavering support. They're really cornering you now, huh? She said, her voice laced with concern. I don't know what to do, Sarah. I want to help, but I can't trust them. I'm terrified they'll just take the money and use it for something else. Okay, she said, her voice firm. Let's think this through. What if you didn't give them the money directly? What if you paid the hospital bills yourself? The idea sparked a flicker of hope. It was a way to help without giving them direct access to the funds. That might work, I said, relief flooding through me. But how do I know what bills are legitimate? How do I make sure they're not lying about the cost of treatment? You talk to the hospital directly, Sarah said. Get the billing department on the phone. Explain the situation. They should be able to give you the information you need. It was a plan, a cautious, carefully constructed plan that allowed me to help without completely sacrificing my boundaries. I called my mom back. I'm willing to help, I said, my voice firm. But I'm not giving you any money directly. I'll pay the hospital bills myself. There was a long pause. Then a sigh of relief. Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much. I spent the next few days navigating the labyrinthine world of medical billing. I talked to doctors, nurses, and billing specialists. I verified costs, confirmed diagnoses, and made sure everything was legitimate. It was exhausting, emotionally and mentally, but it gave me a sense of control, a way to help without feeling like I was being taken advantage of. Finally, the day came for my dad's first major procedure. I offered to take Mom and Lily to the hospital. To my surprise, they accepted. The atmosphere in the car was strained. No one spoke. The silence was thick with unspoken words, unresolved conflicts. At the hospital, I saw my dad for the first time in over a year. He looked smaller, frailer. The illness had taken its toll. He forced a weak smile when he saw me. Thanks for coming, Alex, I nodded, unable to speak. The hours that followed were agonizing. We sat in the waiting room, watching the clock tick by, the tension building with each passing minute. Lily, surprisingly, was subdued. She didn't make any snide comments or demands for attention. She just sat there, scrolling through her phone, her face pale. Mom, on the other hand, was a wreck. She paced. She prayed. She wrung her hands. The fear was etched on her face. Finally, the doctor came out. His expression was grave. The procedure went. Okay, he said, his voice measured. But there were some complications. My heart sank. We were able to address them, the doctor continued. But your father is going to need more treatment. More surgery. And a long recovery period. The weight of it all crashed down on me. The financial burden, the emotional toll, the uncertainty. What's the prognosis? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The doctor sighed. It's too early to say. But it's going to be a long, hard road. As we drove home that night, the silence in the car was heavier than ever. I knew that this was just the beginning. A new chapter in our complicated, dysfunctional family saga. A chapter I wasn't sure I was ready to write. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital visits, doctor's appointments, and medical bills. I spent every spare moment navigating the insurance maze, verifying expenses, and making sure my dad was getting the best possible care. I paid the bills directly, bypassing my parents entirely. It was a constant source of tension. They resented my control, but they also knew they couldn't refuse my help. Lily, surprisingly, started to change. Seeing her father so vulnerable seemed to have shaken something loose inside her. She started visiting him more often, helping my mom with errands, and even, gasp, getting a second part-time job to contribute to the household expenses. It was a small thing, but it gave me a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, she was finally starting to grow up. But the strain was taking its toll on me. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I was neglecting my own life, my own needs. My savings were dwindling. I was starting to feel like I was drowning. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the hospital, I came home to find a message on my answering machine. It was my mom. "Alex," she said, her voice strained. "We need to talk. It's about Lily." My stomach dropped. I called her back. "What's wrong?" I asked, bracing myself. She relapsed, Alex," my mom said, her voice trembling. Relapsed. Lily had struggled with addiction in the past, a secret she had managed to keep from me and my parents for a while. She overcame it, but that was before. I don't know what relapsing can do to a person. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice tight. "She started using again," my mom sobbed. I found needles in her room. I don't know what to do. The weight of it all threatened to crush me. My dad was sick, my mom was falling apart, and now Lily was spiraling out of control. "She needs help, Alex," my mom pleaded. "She needs rehab, but we can't afford it. The insurance won't cover it." My mind raced. Rehab was expensive. Very expensive. And I was already stretched to my breaking point. I don't know, Mom," I said, my voice barely audible. "Please, Alex," she begged. "She's your sister. You can't let her die." It was an ultimatum, veiled in desperation, and it forced me to confront the impossible choice I had been trying to avoid. Could I really afford to save Lily? Could I afford not to? I thought about my own future, my own dreams. I thought about the sacrifices I had already made, the money I had already given. I thought about the years of manipulation, the stolen money, the broken trust. And then I thought about Lily, my sister, the girl I had grown up with, the girl who, despite everything, I still loved. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and made my decision. "I'll do it," I said, my voice trembling. "I'll pay for the rehab." The relief on my mom's face was palpable. "Thank you, Alex. Thank you from the bottom of my heart." But as I hung up the phone, a wave of dread washed over me. I knew that I had just crossed a line. I had committed myself to something that would change my life forever. I had chosen family, but I had no idea what it would cost me. Paying for Lily's rehab drained my savings. I was back to square one, living paycheck to paycheck. My dreams of a down payment on a house dissolving into the harsh reality of medical bills and addiction treatment. But I told myself it was worth it. I told myself I was doing the right thing. I told myself that Lily would get better, that my dad would recover, and that somehow, someday we would find a way to heal as a family. Rehab was tough on Lily. There were days when she wanted to quit, days when she relapsed, days when she seemed lost in a fog of despair. But she kept fighting. She went to therapy. She attended support groups. She worked hard to confront her demons. And slowly, gradually, she started to change. She became more honest, more open, more vulnerable. She started taking responsibility for her actions, and she started expressing genuine remorse for the pain she had caused. My dad, too, started to improve. The treatments were working. His strength was returning. He was starting to look like his old self again. We had family dinners at the hospital. They were awkward, strained, but they were also filled with a tentative sense of hope. We were rebuilding something that had been broken for so long. But just when I started to believe that things were finally turning around, another blow came. I got a call from the bank. There had been suspicious activity on my account. Someone had tried to transfer a large sum of money to an offshore account. The transaction had been flagged as fraudulent, but the attempt had been made. My blood ran cold. I knew exactly who was responsible. I went straight to my parents' house. I didn't bother knocking. I just walked in. My mom and dad were sitting at the kitchen table, their faces etched with guilt. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. They didn't deny it. They didn't even try to lie. "We needed the money, Alex," my mom said, her voice barely a whisper. "We were desperate." "For what?" I asked, my voice rising. "You needed money after all the money I gave for the hospital and the rehab." "For what? Designer clothes? Another car?" "We needed the money to get back on our feet," my dad said, his voice defiant. "We were going to pay you back. Eventually, you were going to steal from me again," I shouted. "After everything I've done for you. After I paid for your treatment. After I sent Lily to rehab." My mom started to cry. "We're sorry, Alex. We didn't mean to hurt you, but you did," I said, my voice breaking. "You hurt me more than you can ever imagine. You betrayed my trust. You took advantage of my love. And you almost ruined my life." I turned to leave, my heart aching with a pain I had never felt before. "Where are you going, Alex?" my mom asked, her voice pleading. "I'm done," I said, my voice cold. "I'm done with this family. I'm done with the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. I'm done." I walked out the door, leaving them behind, and this time I knew it was for good. There was no going back, no more chances, no more forgiveness. The price of saving my family had been too high. I had sacrificed my own happiness, my own future, for people who were incapable of changing. But as I drove away, I felt a sense of liberation. I was finally free, free from the weight of their expectations, free from the burden of their problems, free to live my own life, on my own terms. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that whatever it was, I would face it alone. And that, for the first time in a long time, felt like enough. Years passed. I rebuilt my life. I focused on my career, my friends, my own well-being. I started seeing a therapist to work through the years of emotional baggage I had accumulated. I didn't contact my parents. They didn't contact me. The silence was deafening, but it was also healing. I heard about them through the grapevine. They were still struggling, still living paycheck to paycheck, but they were managing. They were getting by. Lily, surprisingly, stayed clean. She got a job, she got her own apartment, and she started building a life of her own. We reconnected, tentatively at first, but eventually, we forged a genuine friendship. She apologized for her past behavior. She thanked me for saving her life, and she proved, day after day, that she was a changed person. One day, I got a call from Lily. "Mom wants to see you," she said, her voice hesitant. My heart skipped a beat. She's not doing well," Lily continued. "She wants to make amends." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to shut the door on that chapter of my life for good. But another part, the part that still felt a flicker of love for my mother, the part that yearned for closure, that part held me back. "Okay," I said, my voice trembling. "I'll go." I visited my mom in the hospital. She was frail, weak, and her eyes were filled with regret. We talked for hours. She apologized for her past behavior. She admitted to her mistakes. She acknowledged the pain she had caused me. And then she asked for my forgiveness. It was the hardest decision I had ever made, but in the end, I gave it to her. Not because she deserved it, but because I needed to heal. My mom died a few months later. I grieved, but I also found peace. I knew that I had done everything I could to help her, and I knew that I had finally broken free from the cycle of manipulation and abuse that had defined our relationship for so long. I have a family now, a real one, and for the first time in my life, I am truly happy.